Pleased to have Dr. Letitia Smuts with us. She is a senior lecturer in the Department of Sociology at UJ and currently acting chair or the chair? Acting chair. And completed her master's degree in sociology cum laude at UJ, is the recipient of the Freya University NRF Desmond Tutu doctoral scholarship, that's past tense, completed a PhD at the Freya University in Amsterdam with a thesis entitled Getting at Straight Heterosexual Identities, Heteronormativity and Gender in Johannesburg, and is also a holder of the NIH-SS-funded research project on heteronormativity and gender normative views in higher education, and has a number of publications, but I'll just deal with the most recent one, which is from 2021, and it's an article, co-authored article, published in a very prestigious journal, Science, the Journal of Women in Culture and Society. So thank you very much for coming to us, and I am really impressed you were able to draw so many people at this time of the year. This entire building looks deserted, that people have come in numbers, so we're very pleased to welcome you. And generally, the seminar is, you have 40 minutes or more, and then we open up for discussion.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I know a bunch of you submitted your work recently. Congratulations. And thank you so much for being here, and thank you for the invitation. I'm really pleased to be here to speak about an article which was published in the journal Sexualities, which I draw from my PhD thesis. Stephen was speaking about my thesis, which was titled Getting It Straight. So the overall idea of my thesis was to look at heterosexual identities, which is a very normalized, privileged identity, and try and unpack how heteronormativity can often operate within these type of identities. So what is heteronormativity? Who are the ones producing it, and how can we start to challenge heteronormativity within relationships, within different spaces of society? So that was overall kind of where I was going in terms of my thesis. And then, the joys of qualitative research, especially ethnographic work, is that it takes you on different adventures that you never thought you would go on. And this paper is based on one of these, and that is sex toy parties. Tupperware-style sex toy parties. So in a second, I'm going to explain to you what that entails. But I just want to give you a little bit of background for those of you who do work in the field of gender and sexuality. And that is that there's an over-reliance on a specific reason, or let's say there's a research agenda looking at female sexuality in a very negative or problematic way. So I'm not saying that correctly. Basically looking at the negative side of sexuality amongst women. So for instance, reproductive health justice, GBV, HIV risk, teenage pregnancy. So all of these things we know is very serious in a country like South Africa. There are serious problems. However, what we are seeing is only the negative and the dark side, so to speak, of female sexuality. So what a lot of authors have been calling for, myself included, is to get a more nuanced version of what does it mean to be a sexual woman? What does it mean to be somebody who enjoys sex, who has desires, who wants pleasures? So almost like the other coin, at the other side of the coin. And that is where this journey took me on. Of course, the focus was on heterosexual women in particular. I have to stress that again. So it was very interesting that I came across what eventually turned into this paper, where I could actually unpack it a little bit more and see how desires, pleasures, and more importantly, sexual agency, the agency of women, how that looks like. What does it look like? What are some of the limitations? and restrictions. And as such, the title of my talk today is Decently Transgressing, Expressions of Female Heterosexuality and the Discourses of Heterosexual Pleasure in South Africa. So let's return back to this notion of what is a Tupperware-style sex toy party. And I have to just say that this is merely a space in which I was able to explore many other concepts that most of you would know as sociologists, as anthropologists as well. So it became kind of like a catalyst for me to start unpacking how these female participants of mine viewed their own identities. So in a last class, when I was speaking about sex toy parties, somebody Googled it on their phone and they said, whoa, ma'am, you attended these? Okay. Do not just put in a sex toy party. Google is going to take you on a different journey there, okay? What you have to think about is this idea of a Tupperware-style sex toy party. So for those of you who don't know about Tupperware parties in general, in, let's say, the 1950s, 60s, up until the 80s, it was quite popular in America in particular. There were these type of parties, direct selling mechanism, where women would invite their female friends to come to their house, and she will have a bunch of Tupperware displayed in her house, and she will demonstrate some of this Tupperware, and she would sell it. So we can go into the capitalist notions around it a little bit later, but in many ways, these Tupperware-style parties were supposed to give women the opportunity to also bring in a little bit of bacon into the house, right? To also contribute to the household, because they were quite strict normative gender roles. The man as the breadwinner, the woman as the housewife. All right, so fast forward a couple of years later, and now we have what we call a sex toy party, which is the same principle where a woman would invite her female friends over, and instead of Tupperware, she would have sex toys displayed. Dildos, vibrators, lingerie, candles, lubricants, and all these types of toys are then on display for the women. And usually they invite the salesperson to come along and speak about these products and what it can do to your sex life and your romantic lives. So that is kind of like the background, and I attended about 5 of these parties, and they all kind of followed the same recipe. And that is what I want to speak about, this script that as women are often told to follow. And in my paper, I do delve into the history of South Africa a little bit, in the sense of we need to know where we come from if we want to understand where we are going. As a man, as a woman, whatever type of identity you have. So when we look at South Africa historically, we see that gender and sexuality has been approached in a very moralistic and patriarchal way. So basically we can say that there's a moralistic and patriarchal lens through which we can see how gender has been shaped over the years. And now I'm talking about even before apartheid and during apartheid. Of course, during apartheid, we saw laws, very specific laws, specifying who you are allowed to love, who you are allowed to not love, who you are allowed to have sex with. These were very formalized laws. We even see that there was the Immorality Amendment Act of 1969, Act number 57, which prohibited the manufacture or sale of any article intended to be used to perform an unnatural sexual act. Now let's look at that word unnatural even, like what does that even mean? And these are the type of things I'm very interested in. And when we look at apartheid era, their proposal reminds us that during that time, it was not just laws, it's about how society was functioning. What was missing in society, for instance, there's no pornography. You are not allowed to express yourself sexually in a public space. These types of things, of course, changed after 1994. And again, Deborah says to us that after 1994, we see that sex was kind of becoming more public, where it has always been a very private thing. And then we were also seeing that pornography was also more readily available. But people were starting to have more conversations about sex. So in many ways, I wanted to explore what this shift entails. And the reason I was doing that is because my research participants were saying the same thing over and over again to me. They were saying, oh, but it's normal to act like this because my parents told me to. Or it's natural and this is how it's always been. So my question always is, what does it mean this is how it's always been? Right? So where are the pockets of opportunities where we can see that there's actually change taking place within society, within female sexuality, etc. So that was the background I was trying to give in order to try and grasp for myself how the past and the present are meeting one another in terms of how sexuality is experienced. Now, to get back to these 5 parties that I was invited to by my main research participants, it ended up being attended only by white women. I'm not saying that this is not a party that a black woman would attend or would even throw, but in these cases, it was only white women, which then made me think of maybe this paper I will focus on particularly white women, white heterosexual women. And that meant that I also needed to go back again to the idea of history and how the white woman was seen in history during apartheid, for instance. And a lot of the historians like Natasha Erlang and many other, Klute, etc., they were saying that the women, the Afrikaner women, were then also seen as the volksmoeder, meaning the mother of the nation. So she is seen as kind of like the key to the family, somebody who needs to protect the family, but not financially, more in terms of, the more normative ideas of gender, in terms of women as the mother and as the wife. So that just gives a little bit of the background there. And I need to also speak about the framework very briefly. I used a lot of Gail Rubens's work on the charmed circle. I don't know if you're aware of Gail Rubens's work, but she looks at American societies and she was trying to put that society in a sexual hierarchy, saying that, for instance, if this is a circle, everything that happens inside of that charmed circle is okay. It's seen as natural and normal. For instance, heterosexual, having sex within marriage, monogamy, all of these things. And that kind of hierarchy then put value on the type of sexual behavior that people were displaying. And Sylvia Tamale and myself included argue that we can also include it or use it within the African context to a large extent. If you go outside of that charmed circle, but non-heterosexual sex, not being monogamous, not being married, BDSM, anything outside of that is then seen as going against the norm. All right, so that was one of the backgrounds for my framework. And then I also used Christy van der Westhuizen's work that she published recently in 2017 called Sitting Pretty. And Christy was using the word ordentlik, which can be translated to respectable or decent, as kind of like a normative concept to try and explain how women are then kind of conditioned into thinking that they have to act in a very specific way and that needs to be decent. If you just think of the title of her book, Sitting Pretty, etc. And that to me is the framework from where I was able to really explore these very unique, well, probably not that unique, but to me, it was very new. And I did write a paper on reflexivity because to me, I've never attended any of these parties. So it was new to me as well. So I had to explore my own positionality as a researcher, how I reacted to some of this, the stuff that I was exposed to at these parties. So let's get to the most important part, and that is, what does it actually look like at these parties? And I'm just going to read a little bit from the paper just to set the scene. Can feather boas were draped across sofas and hanging off paintings. Pink and white streamers were dangling from the roof, and there were pink plastic cups on the beverage stand. In the middle of the room was a table with several sex toys on display. The partygoers giggled with excitement. They were all getting drinks. They were between the ages of 18 and 40 years old. Then in walked the cell person. I use a pseudonym in my paper. And she explained to us that the merchandise that she was there to promote was aimed at enhancing the sexual lives of women and their male partners. She continued to boast about the freedom that women in South Africa have today to enjoy their sex lives, exclaiming that it is not only men who get their fun by visiting sex shops. And I'll explain that a little bit later. The reason why I had to place emphasis on the pink around the room is it's almost like a flamingo threw up in the room. And I think the only word that I could think of when I walked in there is, wow, this looks girly. To me, that is what they were selling. This is a space for women only. Very girly. And this was at all 5 of the different locations I went to, the women tried to create such a space. I think this was also encouraged by the saleswomen, that they wanted to create a space that is so-called safe for women to speak about all their fantasies or types of products, because just in the next line, you will see that you are exposed to many things that you might not have been exposed to before. For instance, they will send around lubrication, and they would send around lotions, and they will ask you to put it in your hand, blow on it, and then it will get very hot. And they say that if you put it on your clitoris, it's going to get very hot and it will swell up and your man will be so happy. These are the type of messages that are being communicated constantly. Now, what happened amongst the women? What happened? It's what some of you already did, I saw earlier. You giggle, right? Why do we giggle? We giggle sometimes because we feel uncomfortable, or that our lecturers are in the room and you feel a bit uncomfortable. Because in many ways, sex is usually seen as something that is private between you and your partner or partners. In this case, it's very heteronormative, so they are only looking at it as man-woman. That's one of my arguments. So yes, the women were very uncomfortable, and in my interviews with them, both focus groups and in-depth one-on-one interviews, this came up constantly where they were saying, I felt so uncomfortable. And then I would say, but why, you know? And then they would break it down to, we were told as women, as girls, that you can't pleasure yourself sexually, that you're not allowed to masturbate, that you're not allowed to watch pornography, that you're not allowed to go to the sex shop. That is the type of narrative that these women were telling me that they believe came from their parents, who were Christian, who were very moralistic, very conventional. And then other women were saying, but there was something liberating about it. Being able to sit in a room with my friends and actually speak about sex, which I never do. There was something liberating about being in a room that felt like it was made for me and not what they call hardcore, nasty sex shop, which is directed at men, they said. So to them, they never wanted to attend sex shops or adult shops, whatever you call it. The Dutch call it something else. And then they felt like it was dirty, it wasn't a place for women. They would attend it now and again as a joke, you know, like with their friends, to laugh and see what type of products there are in these shops. But my question to them was, did you not ever consider buying something online maybe? I mean, that is quite discreet. And they said, no, it was never a decision to buy something for myself online, which relates to sex toys. So I then started to think, but okay, so how did you end up at this party? And of course, it's friends saying, no, it's going to be fun. There's the promise of alcohol, the promise of camaraderie. And a lot of these women ended up buying some products, not always vibrators or even dildos, but maybe something like scented candles, or you get board games which you can play with your partner. But again, those board games, I just want to stress again, is literally only made for men and women. There's no idea of homosexual coupling or any other type of sexual identity. So it's quite interesting how it's geared. But a lot of the women said they felt really, really uncomfortable when anybody brought up anything that's, in their opinion, kinky. So for instance, the sex swing or cock rings, they would literally blush or giggle, and what they would do is they would make it very clear to the woman who brought it up, because there was a woman who said, oh, I have a sex swing, I use it all the time. And what happened? Veiled judgments. And so the women were also policing themselves at the same time as they were being policed by many other external factors, external discourses about gender and sexuality. The women were also keeping that restrictions in place. So whether or not this is really then a safe space is questionable. In my opinion, a fake safe place. And there were definitely borders that women were not allowed to kind of cross. But then again, what was the point of these sex toy parties if it's not to push the boundaries a little bit? What the salespersons were trying to also do, let's be honest, salesperson, they were trying to make a sale. Yeah. But also they were using this dogma of, I am bringing you new ways of having sex that just goes a little bit outside of your comfort zone, a bit outside of your norm. And that is why I use the title Decently Transgressing, because there's definitely still this contradiction that's taking place. Yes, between the salespersons and the people who, the party goers who attend, but also amongst the women themselves. Another thing that they also didn't want to talk about is anything to do with bondage, sadism, BDSM, except when it came to 50 Shades of Grey. You all know 50 Shades of Grey. Okay, so I'm not going to go, there's a critique following in a different paper, but here's the thing that the salespersons were really latching on to 50 Shades of Grey because it was selling. It was selling. So what they would have is they would have, cute little handcuffs, but everything is pink and pretty with roses to sell for what they think women would like, of course, feminine. They would have a grey tie. Yes, just a grey tie for Christian Grey that you can blindfold your partner with. You can go to Woolworths and buy a tie there. But anyway, they were literally just trying to use it as a marketing gimmick to sell products. But then when I was speaking to the women about what is it that you love about 50 Shades? Is it the idea of, in being involved in BDSM? And they were like, oh goodness, no. There's a handsome rich man. He overpowers her and we find that sexy. Almost all of the women said that. And how does, oh, spoiler alert, how does it end, the series? I don't know if you know this. In marriage with children. So it's telling the heteronormative script all over again. It was just trying to veil it by saying, oh, there's a little bit of kink in here. So these women were really being swept up by the fantasy. And that's what my next paper is about. It's called Selling the Fantasy. But at the end of the day, they all agreed that what is important to them is to be mothers, to be good wives one day. And before I even get to what I call straight expectations, we also need to look at some of the limitations of heterosexual desires. The women were amongst themselves saying that there's a difference between Afrikaans and English white women. According to the Afrikaans women, they were saying the English women are way more open about sex than us. And they were saying that it's because of their Afrikaans identity and how their parents brought them up and the type of education they received as Afrikaans people. But even amongst the English, I just have to point out, even amongst the English white women, they also had certain restrictions which came from what their parents told them, what school told them, most importantly. For instance, they were saying that we were told that you do not refer to the penis, it's a winky. And a vagina, oh, you're not allowed to say that, it's a rose or a flower. So that is why when these salesperson, and they use the biological terms for it, when they were standing there saying, so you're going to take this cock ring and you're going to put it on your partner's penis or whatever the case, the women were laughing because they felt uncomfortable hearing those words that they don't even use in their own vocabulary at home. They were using euphemisms, and this is how they were brought up. So they were saying that they feel suppressed. They felt like for many, many years they were told that they were supposed to be so-called good girls and that that was the only normal or natural way of being women. And this is very similar to what Chrissy also found in her work when she was looking at the idea of decency amongst Afrikaans white women who are middle class. And I failed to say that earlier, but my participants were also middle class, some upper middle class. So then, a lot of the women were saying we were programmed into thinking a specific way, into being told that your own sexual needs are not that important as much as it is to make your man happy. Some of the women in my study would, I think if not that I would like to push them, but if I really had to push them, they would probably say to me that they are bisexual, but they didn't want to say it. Also, they didn't want to say it in front of this group of people. They didn't feel like they had a space within this fake safe space. So in many ways, I don't think it was friendly to bisexual people, to lesbian women. So there's this very specific dogma once again. And that is why in my paper I go into how the salesperson also, they kind of become these moral guardians about how they believe sex should look like. The way they were talking, they didn't leave any other space for any other way of being sexual. Anal sex. Anytime she mentioned anal sex, the woman would also be like this. And the salesperson would be like, oh yeah, and some women are also into that, and walk on and start a different conversation. Then one of my participants said, please, this is like, this is going to remain confidential. I'm like, yes, of course. And she's like, I've had anal sex. I've enjoyed it, me and my partner, male partner, and I don't see anything wrong with it, but I'm very scared saying this in front of this group of women. Because what would it then say about me, right? And then, again, that tension that continuously takes place is that a lot of these women are then at that same space that a lot of women all across the world are at. And that is what I'm sure you've heard about, the Madonna whore complex. On the one side being told that you need to be a Madonna, you need to be decent, and on the other side, when you're in the bedroom, you need to be a whore. So these women were constantly saying that they hate these double standards, but they also don't really understand how to navigate it, how to break away from it. I don't have an answer for that as well, or a clear answer. But anyway, these are the type of discourses that are still being taking place within these friendship groups. And that is what I wanted to say as well, is that these women often knew each other very well, and that camaraderie, and Deborah Curtis speaks about it as well, when she writes about sex toy parties, actually makes it easier for the women, yes, to buy these products, because they're like, I'll try it if you try it, that type of thing that happens. But it also gave them an excuse. A lot of my participants said that they would never attempt to buy something for themselves. But if they go to a sex toy party and they claim that they're doing it to improve the sex lives, of their partners or this group, man, women, then it's almost legitimized. It's almost like it's allowed. So that is why I say that's that constant, it's a contested space in many ways. And then to get to what I was saying earlier about the straight expectations. Almost, even though we're all giggling and we're saying that all these different sex toys are at these parties, at the end of the day, I promise you, at each of the parties, the conversation always went one place. Oh, my husband, he's always working, or complaints about the husband, complaints about partners if they're not married yet. The children's school, etc. So this is the conversations. Eventually, it begins all very hot and heavy in the sense of everybody's giggling and having fun, and towards the end, everybody's just sitting around speaking about life, because that is life, right? But the salesperson knew it very well. I feel like she was very, very, it was the same salesperson for 3 of the parties I attended. And there were 2 other women at the other parties, but they almost had a script once again, because I could see that they knew just how to work things. They would say that, listen, it is your responsibility as a woman to make sure that your husband or your male partner is happy sexually. Otherwise, they will cheat on you. That was always being said. They will cheat on you. So you better treat them right. And then somebody said one day, oh, if only I had the time to do all of that, because between helping the kids with their homework and keeping the house in order, I barely have time for myself. I get so tired. And to this, the salesperson replied, now, ladies, it is our responsibility to make time for our men. Another occasion, one. Yes, exactly. And that is almost the question then. Are we really pushing women to transgress, or are we just putting them back in kind of like a decent little case? Anyway, so that is where I'm grappling with. And then another time a woman was saying, I don't get this. She says, what is the point of these crotchless panties? Isn't the point of a panty to cover up the goods, not expose it? It's just not practical. So the salesperson said, it doesn't need to be practical. It is not for you. It is for your man. They find it sexy and it gives them easy access after all. And as I'm listening to all of this, and I don't want to go into my other paper too much now, but I was also having these same thoughts and thinking, as a researcher, how can I be unbiased here? How can I not see all these different layers? That's why reflexivity is so important, kids, everybody. But so that was kind of like the dominant message that was being sent by these practitioners. So then when we look at what a sex toy party could be, if we looked at it from a very feminist point of view, it could be something very enriching to women. It could be empowering. But I believe that if you put money and capitalism back into it again, then you're going to lose out on that. That is not going to be the point at the end of the day. The point is to be how much you can sell. And remember that the woman who's hosting the party gets a commission on how much is being sold. So to me, it's just kind of like a vicious circle. But I use this term decently transgressing then to really describe these tensions that exist in terms of how heterosexual women shape their ideas about their own sexualities and their own sexual agency, ideas about desires and pleasures. And I believe that through this lens, I was able to try and complicate something that seemed to me is very straightforward. Women going to a party, feeling uncomfortable, going home with a bunch of products, and that's the end of that. However, I did follow up with all my participants. Almost half of them did not use those products at all. It was just laying in a cupboard somewhere, gathering dust. When I asked them why that is, they either said they didn't have the time to really work out what it would entail to actually use these products. And other times they said, no, we felt pressure from the salespersons to buy something. And then I said, but okay, if we do use the argument of what the salespersons are saying, that it could really improve your romantic life and your sex life, wouldn't you want to have that conversation with your husband or your male partner? And they all said it's uncomfortable even having that conversation with them. If anything is kind of seen as outside of the box. And the majority of the women said that they would bruise their husband's egos, that they needed something to enhance sex life, meaning that the man is not really doing their part. So again, how many tensions and pressures are there in something that's supposed to be something pleasurable? So it was evident that, there was a lot of long-standing double standards that kept coming up. And I want to really bring it back to how these young people were still speaking about the past, right? Like, what is your past? Because our past will be something different depending on generation. And they were speaking about their parents and generations before them. So how can we bridge that gap? So women were lured into this idea of consumption, commodified type of heterosex. And despite the promise of pleasure on their own terms, their sexual agency then, in many ways, remains within these heteronormative ideals. Vicious circle. So I would say that it comes with a price in many ways, like attending these parties. And I use the 3 M's. Emphasis is placed on marriage and monogamy and motherhood, which speaks quite a lot to how heteronormativity operates. Because remember, heteronormativity does not only say how a person should be sexual, what is allowed to be sexual, it also speaks to how men and women are supposed to act. It has implications on their roles and the norms that they have to supposedly fulfill in society. So in many ways, there was that vicious circle, there was that tension taking place, and I never felt in these sex toy parties that these women learned much. And that's what they said to me. We learned something about ourselves that we feel uncomfortable doing it. And maybe that's okay. Who said that sex is supposed to be spoken about so privately, so publicly, sorry. It's usually seen as something very private. But here we do have a situation where Tupperware-style parties, it was being sold to women in the kitchen, and now we have a situation where these sex toy parties are aimed at putting women in the bedroom. Well, you can have sex outside of the bedroom, but according to these heteronormative rules, it takes place in the bedroom between you and a male partner. So this study basically wanted to it helped me to also bring closer the idea of how can we start to look at female sexual desires and pleasures, and more specifically, sexual agency. Because agency really is what this paper is all about. It's about the women really putting restrictions on themselves and on others as well. And how can we then bridge this in terms of going forward and what they are also teaching their own children or their future children. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. Am I okay with time? I see 38 minutes, but no. All right. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. So let's take 3 to 4 comments or questions at a time. And can people please briefly introduce yourselves? Okay.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Claire. I'm a lecturer in Harvard. Sounds like the research was really fun. It was really great to hear the way you speak about it with such excitement. So I'm interested in the salesperson, and you said you went with to 3 different of these parties with the salesperson, and actually looking at a very particular type of group of women, middle class, white. You said there was an age range as well. You said quite young, and I'm interested in how do you think that the salesperson might have known who they were speaking to and have a script for particular groups, and perhaps if they did that in a different group, maybe at a bachelorette party with another group of women, they might change the script and change that maybe the sex is not heteronormative, but she could read that group and see that these are the people that I'm dealing with. Because I'm in my group of female friends, we do speak very openly about sex and toys and things like that. So it would be very, it's interesting to maybe the people that are having or hosting these groups are the ones that actually don't want to talk about it. And so they need someone to facilitate something, to kind of get that conversation because they don't want to actually start the conversation themselves.
Thank you.
So can we take
Yeah.
a few more? Then your teams. And can you introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Lee from Social Anthropology. I think my question relates quite closely to what Claire just asked, because I was curious and I was trying not to phrase it as how does one get invited to these parties? Because that might be misinterpreted. But I'm thinking through forms of policing that happens in the space. But then you also mentioned that the person who hosts the party actually gets commission. So I'm guessing it's their responsibility to fill the room. And I'm curious about how large these parties usually are, but also, obviously the person who invites has a lot of agency in determining who will be there. Or am I wrong in assuming that, and whether you can speak a bit to that?
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say I really appreciate that you wanted to focus on joy and pleasure, because I went to a conference and I attended all the discussions on gender and sexuality, and it was all just how tough it is to be a woman, how tough it is to be a queer person, and it's just this. And there was only one discussion throughout the entire conference where it was, I can't remember the author's name, which was looking at how do lesbian women go for their identities and how do they enjoy sex. The whole thing was about how they enjoy sex. And one of my favorite parts about that discussion is she was talking about how some of the lesbian women don't like the word penetration. They were talking about encapsulation and enclosure and their penetration and changing the way women talk about sex entirely. It was so fascinating. And that whole nuance was brought in because she wanted to look at pleasure and joy. And 2 things that I'm kind of curious if you have done any research in these areas, and if not, I think they'd be interesting avenues. So the first one is, it's the space I've been, and I think it's such a radically different space, such an interesting space to be in for everyone, is sex parties, especially sex parties that cater for a wide range of people.
Yeah.
So that have queer people and straight people, older people, young people, people of color, white people. Because these spaces tend to be radically different from what sex is like outside. And every time I've brought friends to these sex parties, because especially a lot of friends who have body image issues, because I'm like, so many of my friends who are ashamed of their bodies, I'm like, come to a sex party, you will feel better about your body afterwards, just because it's such an accepting and welcoming space for everyone, and the focus on joy and pleasure. And if you do a sex party, wow, I think it's so liberating and freeing for people. So I would wonder, have you ever gone to sex parties? Have you done research on sex parties, more like the King BDSM scene? And then the other thing that I was kind of thinking about, also about the age range, is one of my favorite podcasts, Outlets, which is about queer issues, done by free academics. They were discussing a paper about how, the paper looked at how older people in their 60s, 70s, kind of after retirement, were having sex. And the whole discussion that they kind of had is the way a lot of older people are bringing pleasure back into their life now that the way they had sex when they were young is becoming more difficult is through sex toys and BDSM and all these things. And they were talking about how the kind of the loss for a lot of the couples in that paper that they were discussing, this was seen as the loss measure. This is kind of like their emergency brake. This is the furthest, most radical thing they could do to kind of save their sex lives and bring joy back in. But for so many queer people, that's just good sex. And how what is seen as this emergency measure in a lot of heterosexual relationships is like the basics in queer relationships. So that's kind of two things that I'm wondering, have you done research? If you have, what is your findings? Yeah, that's kind of
Great. So let's go with those two. There's a lot there. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for the questions. Claire, yes, you're completely right. They do have scripts for certain people because one of the parties I attended, all the women who attended just had babies. And some were still pregnant. So all of her messages were speaking about pregnancy. So even if you're pregnant, ladies, you can use this. Or, oh, this is a really good product if you gave birth naturally for your vagina, stuff like that. So they were really jacked up on that. And then, of course, you're right with the bachelorette parties. They felt like they could be a little bit more, I don't know, raunchy in a sense. And there they spoke quite a lot about masturbation and self-pleasure. So yes, I think the script changed. And this was particularly the same person who I call Sandy in my paper. I could see that she was different in all these type of parties. And I think that's exactly the point, because I think I called her a practitioner, but at some point I was calling her a facilitator, because isn't that exactly what she was also trying to do, apart from just, you know, selling things? She was also facilitating a discussion. And I think they are very, very smart with their marketing strategy in terms of that. And that is at a previous presentation at WITS where I was still developing the paper. That was everybody's focus. The entire audience was more concerned. Turned out that they were from marketing. I didn't know that. About the marketing strategy. But isn't that interesting that then, you know, they really do know who they are speaking to, and they will change in an instant. And I'm pretty sure they speak to the people, the hosts, beforehand to get a sense of who was invited, you know, just to get to Annie's question as well. How do you get invited to the party? It usually, I don't know how it started, but at least with these 5 parties, the same women were attending as well. Because it's, how can I say, in the first party, I remember there was a woman who said, I want to host a party too. So she spoke to Sandy, and at the next party, you know, she was the host, and that's kind of how it happened. So it's almost like this snowball that took place. And I did see a lot of same faces all the time. And it's usually not very large. It's usually between 6 and 10 women, but I have the biggest one I went to was about 15. And I don't know why, but the less people there are, the more awkward it got. Right? So I guess it's like safety in numbers. So the more women there were, it's almost like you can just kind of disappear and be invisible in the audience. So I would say that the more successful parties were the ones that were a little bit bigger. And they were inviting, see, this to me would be very awkward, to invite your colleagues. So she, like all the hosts, would invite friends and women from work. And some of these women, they wouldn't really even know each other that well. Like, oh hi, it's good to see you, welcome. So it's quite interesting that they weren't really that close. Whereas with their friends, of course, they're very close. So it became a very weird setup. But at the end of the day, all the women were chatting away, and there was definitely, like I keep saying, that camaraderie that developed in this space. It's quite interesting, all these women that are invited. And yeah, you were speaking about a paper that you heard about lesbian, and I wonder if that wasn't Susan Holland-Mutzer's paper. Yes, Susan Holland-Mutzer paper. So I'm working with Susan as well. We're thinking about putting together this whole idea of really looking at sexuality as pleasure, because she was looking at fisting and all those different things. Yes, that's her. So, okay, I have not, I have attended those sex parties in Holland, in the Netherlands. As a complete sociologist, I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, this is interesting. Maybe one day. I was a little bit young back then. I wasn't really scared. But what I'm doing now, the research I'm doing now, is I'm looking at swingers. So I do attend the swingers parties. At the moment, it is purely heterosexual couples, because I am looking at heterosexuality and heteronormativity at the moment. But I do have students working on sex parties from all different types of sexualities. So they are working on that at the moment. So I think there's a lot of interesting research coming about, and there is an agenda shift in research. Even if we look at Delia Barna, just brought out a book with some co-authors speaking about sex and sexuality research in South Africa. One of the key things they mention is that they can see kind of like a shift taking place. Queer sex toys, I always thought about this because I have a really, really large queer community friendship group, and they always laugh at the straight people who are using sex toys to enhance their sex life, where it has always just been a part of their own sex lives. So to me, I mean, as a researcher, I can't really say because I haven't done research on that. However, I can say that it is definitely in the community kind of something interesting. So to me, in my thesis, I speak about getting it straight. And in some ways, straight individuals took ownership of sex. Like, I'm privileged, I have a privileged identity, this is how you do sex. And anything outside of that charm circle, is then seen as going against. Whereas we all know that is, in reality, not the case. Thank you.
So we've got at least 5 or 4. Okay.
Oh, goodness, hi.
And then,
Well, thank you for the presentation. It's quite fascinating. I wanted to find out, why do you think that most of your participants were bisexual? Why? Why do you think that?
Okay.
Hi, thanks. I'm Cheryl from this department. Yeah, I've got lots of questions and some comments. The one is about your role as a researcher. You talked about reflexivity, but your presence in the group, how you identify yourself as a participant observer or as an observer, or, and just and the sort of the ethics of that. So that's the one area. Then the other is around agency. I don't have a clearly formulated question, but I'm sort of sensing and thinking about my own responses to what you're talking about. There's a kind of a swinging backwards and forwards between boundaries are being set and norms are being reinforced, and there's some level of exploration, agency, comrade, whatever, and as well, and just how you. And I think you're also thinking that through. Yeah. So how you are thinking that through.
Thank you, Cheryl.
yes. Okay, so we'll go backwards and then forwards. Do you mind taking 5?
Oh, that's okay.
Okay.
So my voice is a bit down, so we can hear me. My question is actually what Sheila was just asking. You spoke a lot about breaking boundaries and being outside of the box, which is, I do understand that one. But my question was also centered around the agency. Part of the conversation was women taking part of the sexual agency. But the narrative then goes on to be a heteronormative conversation, so it's not based on their pleasure, but rather their partners, etc., etc. Then what really, or how do they make the boundary then, or are they really breaking the boundary? I'm not too sure.
Thanks.
Yes, I really enjoyed it.
Can you introduce yourself?
Oh yes, my name is Sophia. I'm an honor student. Well, can we say we're still an honor student or previously?
Oh, yeah. I hear you.
It's a liminal space.
I really like your presentation. I think it's such an interesting topic. But what was interesting for me, or perhaps this is just kind of just forming this idea. You spoke a lot about the production of this space being quite exclusive. You know, there are very many people who are not a part of this discussion and the safe space. Have you engaged with this kind of discussion outside of it? I'd like to hear if you've spoken about this kind of these identities and these pseudo safe spaces. Perhaps it's not been as easy to access because these are very creative spaces. But I'd like to hear just a little bit about how women outside of this, perhaps this particular white middle class group, experience this and talk about this and how their identities are shaped by that.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Lisa, also a former honor student, depending on my marks, I suppose. So my comment is on, I'm not sure if you've heard of Oprah Mahmoud, but she looks at the politics of piety in Islamic moralist movement, and she critiques this idea that agency can only exist when you're subverting the norms, that only through pushing the boundary do women show agency, and that's a very Western conception of women. And I'm not sure if you've engaged in that critique, but I think that it could be quite useful. As I think you're perhaps also using agency in terms of subversion. And
Yeah, thank you.
Great question. And so then you've only had 5, so I'll add another one. No, it's actually really only adding on to what people have already said. You briefly mentioned the kind of Afrikaner volksmoeders, you know, I mean, and quite a bit has been written about that. So, and then also to look at the upliftment of Afrikaner white working class women and notions of the poor white and sexuality. I mean, I'd be interested with, that's a spectre in all of this. There's a real investment in performing very normative middle class or democrat, precisely because generationally it may not always has been, you know, it wasn't always as stable, perhaps. So, yeah.
Is that a comment or a question?
I'd like it, if you have time, just to elaborate on that, because we're dealing with middle class people who may be upwardly mobile cross-generationally and maybe haunted by the spectre of working class sexualities which could look very different to this.
Yes.
Or even poor white Afrikaner sexualities that require social workers.
Sure.
We've got a lot of time for discussion, so it's fine. No, I'm saying go ahead.
Okay.
If you're okay.
Yeah.
It's related to that, and thinking about sexuality not in the liberatory sense, but more from a critical left feminist Sylvia Federici sense, which sees the idea that sexuality is actually part of work, it's part of your kind of duty as domestic work.
Right.
And so I've been thinking about this then, and how then sexuality can also be sold, wanted to sell these products, when also it's a sort of ideologically selling that this is the antithesis of work, right? You just not go, you're free, you can be savage, and then the next day you'll like put on your suit and go back to work and so forth, but that actually this is part of the process of being capitalized, basically, in capitalism. And maybe this kind of theoretical lens into working.
Well, can I start with backwards? Can I move backwards? Yeah, let me do that. Thanks, Claire and Stephen. I think that is exactly what I'm trying to do with my book, because now I want to take this a step further and put it into a book, because again, my focus was completely not on this topic at all. And this is kind of like a side project. It became a side project for me, and which I've now fallen in love with. I'm very passionate about. I feel like I haven't seen anything written on it that much from this lens. So it is something that I really want to develop. It is something that I need to think about, because I struggle with theory. I mean, I'm glad Bernard is not here, is he? But you know, like, I'm not that strong. Oh, hi, Bernard. I'm not that strong with theory. I'm the empirical person all the time. And now I want to push myself a little bit further to actually start to think, well, how can we make sense of this? And what could I perhaps, you know, get from it if I do bring a little bit more of a critical type of feminist angle to it. So, I mean, the thing is as well, another, with the Desmond Tutu scholarship, they wanted me to only look at white Afrikaans individuals, because that was a research gap. And I was very much against it. I didn't feel like, I felt like I needed diversity. Already being taught that I should only look at heterosexual people after I've been looking at queer people my entire academic career was already a struggle. So I fell in love with the topic of heteronormativity and looking at heterosexual people, looking at it from the top down, right? But I didn't want to limit it only to white people. Now, that is something that, you know, everybody kept, even in my defense, they were saying generationally, and I can't really say, it's something that I haven't really explored. We are looking at a very interesting group of individuals who are upwardly mobile. On purpose, I looked at middle class, upper middle class individuals in my thesis. Because of that, I wanted to see what the possibilities can be of having a little bit more resources available to you to actually push the limits. That was my theory in general. And I found that amongst the white individuals of my study, it wasn't always the case. Now, which of course is not in this paper, is my black participants. They were really kicking ass, if I can put it that way. They were really pushing boundaries. They were really showing different sides of themselves sexually, but not just sexually, just in all parts of their lives. So for me, I'm sorry, I can't answer any of your questions. It is something I'm thinking about, and I've been coming at it from an intersectional point of view, you know, looking at the different intersecting identities and where there are moments of resistance. So, you know, hopefully it's something that I can definitely take further. And I mean, we were speaking about, oh, Lisa? Yes, Lisa, thank you for that. I mean, that is exactly where I think my thinking also should be going in terms of that. And I don't know if this group of individuals were actually giving me the resources to actually expand on it. Look, it was a small sample. And this is what I want to do. I want a bit more diversity in terms of females, to try and see, because this also ties into what somebody else was saying. My black participants in my study, black African participants, were saying to me that they would totally throw sex to a party. They would totally, like, they don't see anything wrong with it. They were giving me quite different narratives to this very particular white sample. And I'm just thinking about, you know, if we open up this space, can we see that agency, you know, and how can I say, like, pushing the boundaries, coming out a little bit more, in a sense? You can add on to that, Jess.
No, what I'm trying to say is, how could these white women have been using agency, particularly in re-establishing these rights? As an agency isn't just saying yes or trying or pushing the boundaries, but also in building those things, and how a narrow focus on progressive politics and agency misses and describes agency only into certain actors. I'm not sure if that makes sense.
I think I'm getting you, but maybe not quite. Maybe not quite.
So you're suggesting they could be their agency in reproducing the sexual moral order.
Yes, exactly. That agency is not limited to progressive politics.
Yes.
Yeah, and I feel like the way that you're using agency in this piece is only when they're challenging.
Right. No, I see exactly what you mean now. Thank you for explaining that. No, I think maybe in my presentation I did do that, but in the paper I say two sides of the coin. I keep doing that the whole time. That's why I'm using decently transgressing, because I'm exactly trying to say that I don't know, it's in between. Like, what is agency then really? You know, on the one hand, women are using it in this way, and on the other hand, women are using it in this way. And I think that is the contested space that needs to be unpacked a little bit more. You know, that is exactly it. So I agree completely with you there. And exclusionary, okay, Cynthia. Oh, and that is what I wanted to say about my Black female participants. They looked at me really. Look, it is a hidden space. That's why I say in my abstract, it's a little bit hidden. People don't often talk about it except in friendship groups. But then my Black female participant said to me, I don't see a problem with it. We will throw a party like that if we wanted to. It's just never come across our way. So currently, I have a transgender woman and her friends going to throw this party, and they are all from different racial groups. So we're going to see how that is going to go. And this is not, I don't know, I need to get ethical clearance first because I still have the book in my head. This is what I want to do, but I don't want to just focus on sex toy parties, of course. But that could be an interesting way to see how, you know, what takes place at these parties, you know. And I think somebody was saying exactly that, like agency breaking the boundaries. But then again, what is agency? We need to really, that back and forth, I think is the tension could really tell us a little bit more. And that is what I'm starting to do and hopefully will continue to do with the book. And I was a participant observer for all these parties. So I think I did the ethnographic work for 3 years. And of course, I didn't expect to go to a sex toy party. I went to many bars. I went to lots of nightclubs. Awful. So yeah, I did the whole shebang. I had my 15 main participants who I followed around. In terms of ethics, I had to, of course, get permission from everybody beforehand. They pretty much forgot very soon that I was a researcher after the alcohol started flowing. I have to be honest. And I think that also was the case with the nightclubs as well. In the beginning, there was a bit of awkwardness over the, you know, you build up rapport over time, of course. But with these sex toy parties, you can't build up rapport because it's only once off type of parties. And then I had my participants, you know, I would ask people who were there, do you want to partake in the study? And I would contact them afterwards because a lot of them said yes, but then they were drunk. No, really, this became one big drinking session, to be honest. And I was just trying to keep my wits about me. They knew, you know, and inform them before they started drinking. And they also had to sign informed consent forms. But this, by the way, I just have to say, was for you, Jay. I didn't even do it through you, Jay. I did it through the VU in Amsterdam. And to them, that type of ethical procedures, they said there's nothing wrong with it and you can take photos as well. I was like, okay, in my university, the ethical committee would be very funny about taking photos and all of that. So I was constantly trying to make sure that I'm doing the right thing ethically, even though they didn't even require me to have ethical clearance, which is again bizarre. Always get ethical clearance, especially if you want to publish. Most journals are now asking for your number, your ethical number. So, I mean, I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, it went very well in the sense of, I think they just really forgot and I just became part of the group, even though I know it's dangerous to say that. Yeah. Thanks, Sean.
I think a follow-up on my previous question. So
sure.
In my previous one,
okay.
No, so I'm wondering about, again, the organizer and in relation to questions around agency. How much can that organizer be viewed as a gatekeeper in terms of reproducing a particular space in these settings? Is what I want to get at.
Okay, Joachim, and Julie.
No, mine is not a question, sorry, Johan.
Oh, I didn't answer why bisexual, sorry.
Oh,
Yes, sorry,
Do
I
you want to
forgot.
include that in, go back to it in this round? Yeah.
Okay, I'll come back to it, sorry.
I was also just thinking the whole thing about decently transgressing, another area where this can be kind of flipped on its head in the other direction is looking at the way queer people, because queer people normally seem very transgressive in their sexual behavior. Well, it's assumed that queer people just transgress all the boundaries and will never attach to any of the rules that heterosexuals play by, and we're just playing by a whole different set of rules. But talking about this, I was thinking about discussions I've had with my queer friends, and especially one conversation came up where we were talking about how different toxic relationships in between queer men and queer women are. Because if it's two men in a relationship, if the relationship is toxic, it's normally cheating and people don't trust one another, it's just fighting. And with queer women, it's a thing of relationships will be bad or toxic. And queer men, the relationships are short. They're volatile, they're kind of, and with queer women, they were like, they'll stay loyal and in a relationship long after each other. They kind of have the sense of duty that they need to stay in this relationship, they need to fix it. Whereas a lot of queer men are first not kind of there. And we're wondering why it's so different from queer men and queer women. And what we kind of end up discussing is because we're playing out the way we were socialized as men and women.
Sure.
Women have this kind of, are socialized to be protectors and be emotional support systems. And queer men are taught that when things get, well, men are often taught that when things become emotionally difficult to withdraw or to escape. And what we're kind of realizing is in the queer relationships where men and straight men were kind of socialized to balance one another out in some way, that the more toxic sides of socialization, both in men and women, were being amplified in a lot of toxic queer relationships. And then we're talking about how it's so often in research and in normal life, it's assumed that queer people just transgress these boundaries, right? Sometimes the thing researchers will get that queer men are still men, they're still socialized as men, they still absorb the kind of scripts patriarchy passes onto them, but often, even between my queer friends, that kind of thinking isn't there. We think we're above it or we're outside of it. We kind of often forget how often we do transgress, but I think we sometimes forget that we're still within these systems.
Right.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, because you can't separate gender and sexuality then, that's the thing. You know, people, you know, often we know that it's linked somehow, but actually what you're speaking about is also notions about masculinity, really, at the end of the day. You were taught to act this way, you were taught to act that way growing up. So it will, of course, transcend over to these different, all types of sexualities, I think. I think gender is, my PhD supervisor used to say gender is everywhere, you know, and I think that is also the case with queer identities. You know, people just tend to forget about it, including researchers sometimes. So I'm just agreeing with you. I'm adding on to, no, I agree with you completely. You know, and sorry, I'm so sorry I missed your question. Look, I wouldn't say half of my participants were bisexual, but quite a lot of the participants there said that they are attracted to women, that they would have sex with women, that they would kiss a woman, that they were fantasizing about women, that they wanted to, you know, all these fantasies that they had. And of course I said, you know, we all have fantasies, so, you know, it's fine. And they would say, no, but I would act on it, if only I could. And that is the type of language they kept using. And then I said, but why wouldn't you? No, because it's not normal. Or it's not natural. In fact, I really wanted to write a linguistics paper about the, you know, the type of words. If I had to do, I did do a content analysis on how many times they were using the same words over and over again. Unhealthy, unnatural, abnormal, all these type of things. So a lot of them, to me, and like I said, I don't want to be judgmental, but to me, it sounded like, okay, maybe you are bisexual. You're not going to ever come out and say it. There's only one person who said, yes, she would
I want to ask Professor Dennis Francis, who actually initiated this, in terms of suggesting this would be a fantastic invitation, and then we got the well, just generally, I think it's been an extraordinary discussion. Anything you'd like to add or not? You don't need to, but if you want to.
Well, I think I've been kind of discouraged as the numbers of severity kind of dwindling down. Before we needed something to spice.
The turnout has been pretty good.
I think more would have come, the time of the year. But perhaps maybe I suppose I was going to ask this to share later on, drink a glass of wine, but ask now. So I've been to some queer sex parties, sex drive parties. And the queer sex drive parties is men, or gay men going to these parties. But how these become colonized by heterosexual women? Because gay men, bad habits.
Fag gags.
And so, how much of the kind of facilitation or practitioners become more about what would please gay men, or please gay or women, and so women that kind of appropriate the choice. And a lot of sales actually happen to heterosexual women, the gay sex. And just the labeling of the thing is at the top of the pile. The gay men have sparkles and toys. Just to let you know.
Okay.
Maybe you can comment on this too. So yours perceived as very compulsory heterosexual, and here these were parties directed at gay men or toys, which became very. The kind of what I suppose I'm asking is, in one way, the kind of sexual binary of heterosexual and homosexuality almost became diluted at this kind of point.
Yeah. But also those women who were attending it, I wonder if they even felt more comfortable buying these sex toys, being amongst a group of gay men. I don't know. I mean, that is exactly what I think or envision perhaps that was happening. But if you speak about the hag or whatever the case may be, these women wouldn't even know what that term meant. Do you see what I mean? So I'm thinking it. And I hate using the word more liberated, but perhaps there are levels of certain women being more liberated, depending on, and I want to hear what you have to say. Yes, do you agree with me or disagree?
No, I'm just thinking about this phenomenon. One thing I found very interesting, and I've discussed it both at Sex Politics in Australia Women and just some of my female friends in Australia. There is gay porn, which is very much directed to Australia.
Yes.
And I find it very interesting because, and normally, look, that's gay porn, some gay men watch it, but most of the gay men I speak to, when I bring up the studio, it's a negative kind of porn. It's not what most gay men are into, because it's very gentle and it's very sweet, and it's these guys being very loving and caring with one another. And
there's a market, I'm telling you, and also,
audience for those studios are straight women who like see men speaking with one another. And I think when I spoke to women who enjoy this kind of porn, it was always like, I don't have to think about where I fit into this. I don't have to think about myself when I look at it. I can just enjoy the sex without having to try and figure out how I would fit into this kind of thing. And that's what was very liberating and freeing today.
Very interesting. Yes, Dennis.
A lot of the discourses about what we're speaking about, the search about sexuality is about for the pleasure of men.
Yes.
But interestingly, that what we even think of pleasure of men, for instance, none of this stuff is about penetrating men. Or everything is talks about how or what things will be to women when having the skin, etc. And so even when we talk about sexual pleasure, how that's heteronormatively framed, that only pleasure will be to men, and not men are looking at me in a very kind of look, is all about how they will penetrate with pleasure. And so much of that is certainly true. So these parties are are marketed around men being penetrated or part of penis.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is exactly it. I have a very nice sentence in here that says the presence of the penis is both assumed and I can't remember what I said, but that is definitely it. That is exactly what happened at these type of sex toy parties with the women. And sorry, you had a question as well about the salesperson. Everybody's excited, so I'm getting very excited. Sorry. This is
so the organizer as the gatekeeper.
Yes, as the gatekeeper.
Right,
Yes.
and what kind of space they reproduce? You know, do they? I guess. You know, in terms of the profile of the people who show up, you say, you know, there's women of white women, particular age, they're all married or in a relationship with a man, and whether that's a form of gatekeeping that's happening elsewhere.
I suppose.
Before you
So,
answer, because we are drawing to a close, are there other questions that people have? I have one too.
Okay.
But you go first.
Well, it's just really in a way of follow-up
Yeah.
from Henry's. It's around the relationship between the host and the salesperson. How does that work?
Okay. Okay.
Okay, then my one is, I mean, is this a kind of post-asexuality research wave? Because with AIDS, you had a massive amount of research on sexuality, but often sexuality as danger, as threat, as risk. Yeah. So, and that proliferated and also had race, class, and sexuality dimensions that were, in a place like South Africa, very important to understand and how to look at it now. It was a pathologizing discourse. It was about fixing sexuality in the name of public health. So I'm interested in that backdrop and what it does in terms of what you're trying to do. But yeah.
Sorry, one more question, I'm speaking too much. So my own research is more into utopianism and how utopianism kind of functions as a mode of cognition. We will allow to think of the ideal and the perfect and then pursue it. And the mind's mostly around environmentalism. But I now that you bring up the whole AIDS thing, I would actually, I was just wondering, it would be very interesting to do a thing about queer utopia, what a sexual liberated utopia would actually look like. And there is one like mixed media project, I can't remember what the name is, I could find the name, I would, but the whole thing was, what if the AIDS crisis never happened? And that's the whole premise of the kind of like project. And it's kind of this utopian thing where it's so many, like one of the most absurd things, and I love it, it's a very queer thing, where instead of, to prevent sort of STDs, doctors invent poppers that
Okay.
STDs, and they find new ways that people don't have to have sex with condoms, but it's safe. And there's this whole thing about what a world would look like if people prioritize sex and pleasure, and there wasn't this whole anxiety about what sexual entails. I'm curious, what do you think like this sexual utopia might look like?
Oh my word, that is an absolutely difficult question.
Next book.
All right, what's the time? Okay. Look, I guess I will go back to my NIHSS project, which is called Frustrating the Norm. We need to disrupt norms. So I would say that utopia would be without any normative rules. I mean, we're talking about a utopia there, so I can dream, that type of thing, because that is what sets boundaries. And yeah, I mean, exactly that. I believe that we have moved on slightly. Okay, I want to be very careful when I say that, because I think what we are now embarking on is maybe different contours of sexuality rather than trying to move away completely from looking at sex in terms of risk and health issues. And the reason I say that is because of class, socioeconomic class. We absolutely, I don't think, I do work on gender-based violence as well, and this is the poorest of the poor women. And to be honest, I don't think I will ever include them in any of my research on sexual pleasure, because they, I mean, not ever, but they are consumed with other issues at the moment, and I think it's really difficult to try and look past that. But anyway, I'm trying to say that we're opening, we should be opening it up at least. Salespersons as gatekeepers, yes, they do meet with the hosts beforehand to kind of discuss who will be around, how things will go, what they can expect. The hosts are the one who tells them to decorate the place in such a very specific way. It's word of mouth at the end of the day. I don't know what more to explain there, but these companies, because I've looked at their websites, it looks like a heteronormative script. It really does. It really does look like it is catered for the heterosexual couple. I think I came across one organization that just started in South Africa but didn't really pick up, that was saying to all alternative lifestyles, didn't really pick up. Those ones who were, and that I think is the problem. Because it is, heterosexuality is a privileged identity, it's the dominant kind of normative identity. And if we continue to only see it from this angle, what are the implications going to be going forward? If we can't see different utopias or different ways of being sexual and having sex. Sorry, I hope I did it under a minute.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good luck with the further research and the book.
Thank
Yes,
you.
and we will invite you back again.